Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown. I just want to say real quickly, thank you from the bottom of my heart, thank you, because this channel has finally crossed 4,000 subscribers. In honor of this momentous occasion, we will be hosting a live stream in the very near future, most likely on January 9th. I'm not entirely sure just yet. It kind of depends on my work schedule. I will happily provide you with more details when I have them myself. What I do know for sure, though, is no matter what day it's on, we're gonna drink, we're gonna party, we're gonna have some fucking fun, and by popular demand, we will also finally return to the apparently intoxicating world of Dream Daddy. Y'all have been begging me to return to this game ever since the Christmas stream, and you're finally gonna get your fucking wish. So stay tuned for more details. I hope you tune into the stream whenever it is. Again, I'm aiming for some time within the next week. And once again, thank you for your continued support and patronage. I love each and every goddamn one of you. Now then, without further ado, let's talk about Arrows, the latest studio album from Red Fang. To be honest with y'all, I haven't really enjoyed a lot of stoner rock or stoner metal for quite some time. Not so much because I actively dislike the genre per se, quite the opposite. I do think it can be very fun in the appropriate setting, if you catch my meaning, wink wink nudge nudge. But I do think musically the genre in these last few years especially has become very bland, very monotonous, very stale, and very predictable. As we speak, there are literally hundreds of bands right now rehashing the same tired, fuzzy riffs and grooves over and over, singing about the exact same shit, producing their records in the exact same manner. For these reasons, I actually had high hopes going into this Red Fang record because I think these guys are just a step above your typical stoner rock and metal crew. The songwriting, while not exactly cutting-edge avant-garde shit, is generally a lot smarter and a lot more clever and engaging than your typical stoner metal jam. And as a result, they've been responsible for some of the more noteworthy stoner jams of the 2010s. Their 2013 record, Whales and Leeches in particular, is probably one of my favorite stoner rock or metal albums altogether. Plus, after 5 long years of writing and recording, one can't help but be somewhat curious as to what kind of crazy and chaotic rock and roll jams these gentlemen could have possibly concocted. And in some ways, right off the bat, Arrows lives up to a lot of my hopes and expectations. For one, sonically speaking, this is probably Red Fang's biggest and heaviest album yet. The production and sound mixing as well is really damn good. The guitars are so brutal, they're practically dripping with bog water and sweat and static and sludge. The bass is so fierce and deep and earthy. The drums are so chaotic, you can really feel them in the pit of your gut. And the vocals are so menacing, even when the material itself is relatively catchy and upbeat. Overall, the performances are pretty crazy, but impressively despite that, I don't think the musicianship for Red Fang has ever been quite this tight. At times, this album almost kind of feels like something that Mastodon or Baroness might whip up if they were trying to write a much more straightforward kind of hard rock album. And as a result of all of this, we're treated to some pretty entertaining and even ambitious material. Take for instance the track Fonzie Scheme, a pretty tongue-in-cheek kind of mid-pace stoner metal burner with some huge sludgy riffs contrasted with some surprisingly powerful string instrumentation, which makes this track, especially in its final moments, a lot more epic and majestic than any Red Fang number quite frankly has the fucking right to be. The track Days Collide impressively manages to go even harder than that, with some very dreary and angsty multi-layered vocal passages droning alongside some dark, doomy, sludgy instrumentation. It does pick up literal momentum right around the middle, but even so, it's a pretty evil track. It kind of sounds like if Remission-era Mastodon tried to write a doom metal song. And then there's Anodyne, quite possibly my favorite cut on the entire record. It manages to find this ooey-gooey sweet spot, in between the bittersweet grunge of a band like the Melvins, and the raucous, ripping stadium rock of one Rob Zombie. It's really fierce, a little bit creepy, overflowing with pus and slime and sludge, and despite all of that, it is ridiculously, almost infectiously catchy. Even some of the more objectively straightforward material on the album can still impress, in part because they have just enough of their own subtle spices that they never feel derivative. They never feel like carbon copies of other stoner rock jams from other stoner rock bands. Take, for instance, the track Why, which has some very bitter and atmospheric acoustic guitar with some moody lyrics that give this an energy almost akin to that of some post-grunge, or even more specifically mid-90s Soundgarden. And even My Disaster manages to convert a pretty atypical kind of stoner metal jam into a pretty raucous and speedy number, almost resembling a punk song at times. But the key word here, ladies and gentlemen, is some, because unfortunately, I don't think all of the tracks are as inventive, as engaging, or even as entertaining as a majority of the tracks we've already mentioned. In fact, some of the tracks weirdly but ultimately boil down to being exactly what I hate the most from stoner rock: boring, derivative, forgettable, rehashed jams. Tracks like Arrows, Two Hide, and Funeral Coach just aren't as clever and aren't as fun. They kind of bleed together and are kind of quickly forgotten, especially when placed alongside cuts like the aforementioned Fonzie Scheme, Days Collide, Why, Anodyne, and a few more. On top of that, I think the album starts off on a very weak note, with a pretty pointless kind of atmospheric introduction, followed up by a really sloppy kind of stoner rock number that feels like it could have been pulled off of an old demo that they recorded in their garage years ago. It's just not up to par, and neither is Interlop Mod, which single-handedly brings the entire album to a literal screeching halt. And it's honestly really disappointing because I think had this album been more consistent from start to finish, had it scraped away some of the pretentious atmospheric bullshit and retooled the entire introduction, this could have been Red Fang's best album yet, and maybe even one of the more interesting stoner rock and metal albums in recent memory, at least in my opinion. Still, I will concede that this is probably the most I've been interested in any stoner rock and metal for a long time, and there are still plenty of super exciting and entertaining jams. So, warts and all, I will give this a very, very, very enthusiastic 3 out of 5. I think overall, fans of Red Fang will be satisfied. Anyone who likes stoner rock and metal, but perhaps looking for something just a little bit spicier, a little bit funkier than usual, should be satisfied as well. But if you're like me and you are somewhat disillusioned with the genre as a whole, I'm not so certain this would do much to convince you otherwise, unless you, like myself, had some kind of special place in your heart for Red Fang. If you are interested, I would say, to be entirely safe, maybe just look at some of the key tracks I've mentioned, like Days Collide, Fonzie Scheme, Anodyne, and then after that, see if you're really still interested in checking out the full album. Camera has gone out, not sure why, gonna have to investigate later, but that's fine, because I don't really have much more to say. We're pretty much at the end of the review anyway, so 3 out of 5, a pretty enthusiastic one at that. It's a shame that half of this album ultimately boils down to being a pretty cookie-cutter kind of stoner rock metal experience, but hey, that other half, it fucking slaps. So definitely check out the songs I've mentioned, and again, see how you feel after that. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this album? Do you not like this album? And what do you want to hear from me next? Thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you can get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.